Doctors who have been in, and is anybody here a doctor? Situation: what happened? My mom has had to respond twice on flights when someone was in distress. The first time was in the air and a guy was having a diabetic low. She monitored him until we landed. The second time was sitting on the tarmac when a guy had a stroke. They delayed the flight and took the dude off the plane. She also said that after the first one, the airline sent her a thank you card and said please use these enclosed vouchers to get tickets to a destination of your choosing, but they forgot to include the vouchers. She said she thought it would be rude to write back and say hey, you forgot the vouchers. That's how they getcha. Also, good job on your mom in both cases. Sounds like someone took the free flights for themselves before sending the card out. Edit, spelling. My thoughts exactly. Yank. My friend has had it happen twice to him. Both heart-related in restaurants. Was able to use a defibrillator to save one's life and the other unfortunately passed. Defibrillators don't work if the heart is completely stopped, and CPR is a long shot and didn't work in this case. My wife is a doctor. She passed out on a plane trip and we had to see if there were any other doctors. Well, don't leave us hanging. Were there any wastroprof? No. She still passed out on that plane. My father, doctor, 30 years ago was sent to work in southern Italy, although he already lived with my mother in the north, and a large part of the salary ended up in tickets to return by plane every weekend. The fact is that during the flight to the south, lasting about 1 hour, they do not give anything to eat except they pass with a trolley to give candies, needless to say the classic situation of the old woman who chokes on it and cannot breathe. My dad was called in with a few heavy blows on the back. He managed to get the candy out of the poor old woman. A week goes by and the day of the return on the plane comes. The trolley with the candies passes promptly and out of nowhere a girl sitting in front of my father who was trying to get one is blocked by her friend. Don't take it. Last week they told me that an old woman got choked up and to free her a doctor had to slap her really hard on the back. I like the thought of an Italian flight where everyone panics, but they find a doctor, and he assesses the situation very carefully and he chooses not to use the Heimlich maneuver, but instead of that, professionally elects to slap her on the back, but like really hard. I'm a nurse. We're taught to do 5 hard back slaps before moving on to abdominal thrusts. Edit, I'm in the UK. It may well be different elsewhere, but that's certainly what we're taught here. Open-handed. Skin on skin? With a wet palm. I choose death. The Ric Flair School of Life Savory. While we were on our descent, somebody lurched over in their chair and became unresponsive, tachycardic, and diaphoretic. The whole episode lasted for about 2 minutes. Then he woke up and vomited. I figured he had an arrhythmia, and recommended he not take his connecting flight to Cleveland, and instead go to the ER. EMS was waiting on the ground and helped him off the plane. I actually saw him again on my return flight home. He told me he was diagnosed with an arrhythmia, and made an appointment to see a cardiologist in our hometown. Is this a somewhat frequent time for arrhythmias to present? I don't fly very often, but I've seen 3, maybe 4 of this type of thing on a flight. Please note, I'm not a doctor, but I'm going on the symptoms you mentioned. It was probably just a coincidence that it happened during descent. A lot of people underestimate the stress flying puts on the body, especially if you have some cardio or other underlying condition. Think about it, if you go mountain climbing you have time to acclimatize to higher altitudes, whereas on a plane you go from the ground to about 8,000 feet, typical cabin pressure, in a few minutes. That's definitely got shocked some systems. Reverse on descent. I've flown with congestion and it was as painful as shit, especially on the descents. Not to mention thrombosis of the legs on long flights. On the other hand, I've heard that scuba divers should avoid flying for similar reasons if they've done a dive within the last 24 hours. If you rise too quickly from a deep dive, you can get what's called the bends, otherwise known as decompression sickness. If you get on a plane shortly after diving, that can really duck your shit up. Source: a project I did in grade 5 about bridges and how it was discovered in Brooklyn. To elaborate, for anyone interested, the sudden decrease in pressure from extremely high pressures underwater will cause dissolved gases in the bloodstream to expand and form bubbles in the body, specifically the joints. This can be very bad for 2 primary reasons, the first being the obvious fact that these bubbles are extremely painful and the body doesn't have an efficient way of removing bubbles in the bloodstream and interstitial spaces between cells. The second reason is that these molecules can be vital to cellular processes but can't be transported around the body when in gaseous form separate from the blood, which can be problematic. While it is cautioned to not rise quickly underwater to avoid this, decompression can still occur on a plane shortly after diving since the nitrogen takes time to decompress back to its normal partial pressure in the bloodstream even after surfacing from diving. Happened in an airplane. Me, as a 4th grade medical student and my professor at an airplane for going to a medical congress in our country. A man 50-ish years old lost his consciousness. We got there before the cabin crew. Yelled the situation. Had to do CPR for 25 minutes until we have landed at an airport for emergency landing. We still had a 1.5 hour of way, and we also landed off with him to make him reach hospital safely. It was a rural military airport. Airplane waited us to return, took a 40 minutes later after we landed, got to our destination. In return flight, we were upgraded to business class and taken from our hotel by a private chauffeur. Edit. Holy smokes. Thanks for the awards. Please donate the awards to the front lines. I do not need it. Also, I have watched Doogie Howser. Oh my god, it is hilarious. 25 minutes of CPR? You must have been exhausted afterwards. Even 5 straight minutes on a dummy, and I was telling the dummy he wasn't going to make it. You are awesome. And your English is great. We were 2 people and turned in every 2 minutes. I would be giving breathes and my professor would be on compression or vice versa in minute 15. We got a shockable rhythm, so we gave some shock also. At ambulance, he had a regular heartbeat. It was nuts. Staying alive. At first I was afraid, I was petrified. No, Michael, the Bee Gees. I'm not a doctor but I'm a nurse. Just yesterday morning, I heard these women screaming in the hallway of my hotel, "We need help. Does anyone know CPR?" I ran out the door and told these women I was a nurse. They took me to the front lobby where they found a young woman who seemed to have overdosed. She wasn't breathing but she had a pulse at first. It started to get weaker then stopped altogether. I had to do 4 rounds of CPR before I felt a pulse again, and it was right as the imps were walking in. I work in nursing homes and most people are DNRS. I've never had to do CPR on anybody. It's crazy. That was my first time and it was at a ducking hotel and not even work. Then you just so happened to ask this question? Lol. You're amazing. She was so lucky you were there. Yes, thank you. You tits out shits out. I really need to get into the habit of looking at usernames. I feel like a lot adds some humor to their story, especially when they're recounting saving someone's life and their username is something like that, lol. Always check usernames. I was flying out of my home airport during my intern year. I had just finished my cardiology rotation, intensive care. The flight attendant asked for a doctor, because a passenger had severe chest pain. It turned out there was also my senior resident and my queue attending on the same flight, unknown to me. All 3 of us had worked together for the past 2 months and signed off the queue the day before. Like a well-oiled machine, we took care of the patient. He was stable, thankfully. An ambulance was waiting for him when we landed. And I was very grateful to have both my senior resident and my attending at the time. What a coincidence. Also, because the most exposure I've had to those terms, resident and attending, is via Scrubs, I'm imagining this scene as Dr. Cox, JD, and probably Elliot working together on the patient. Cox probably yelling at Janet to pay some ducking attention or whatnot. This makes the story even better. I imagine the look on Cox's face as he is attending to the patient as Janet runs up one aisle exclaiming he is a doctor and here to help. Just as Barbie runs up the other and trips over some luggage, falling and hitting the patient or something. Recently, before the coronavirus, I was taking an international flight. The flight attendant asked on if there was a doctor aboard. I was actually asleep, but somehow that woke me up. And I was like, wait, you need a doctor? Turns out a patient was experiencing some diffuse chest pain. Went to examine him and my inner alarm bells rang when I asked him some questions. I had a very high suspicion that this guy was having an aortic dissection. I told the flight attendant, who passed on the information to the pilot. The pilot made an emergency landing at a different airport, met with an ambulance. I later called the hospital to find out what exactly it was, and turns out I was right. If they had carried on, he might not have survived. Edit, aortic dissection is when the aorta tierce is about to burst. Edit 2, holy shit, this blew up. I'm at work right now, but I'll try to work through the comments when I can. Edit 3, thanks for the awards, kind strangers. Edit 4, oh wow, even more awards, you guys are awesome. Oh my goodness. Great job. You should feel 1010 proud of yourself every day for the rest of your life. Thank you, smile. It's a good feeling when you can apply these skills and save lives in the most unexpected situations. Also, not the first case I've had on a plane. But this was definitely the more severe one.